Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stress-Free IEP, the show where we help families build their village so they can raise their neurodivergent children with confidence, clarity, and support. I'm your host, Frances Schefter, special education attorney, advocate, and fellow parent walking this journey with you. Each week, we shine a light on professionals, services, and real-world strategies that support your child both inside and outside of school. From navigating the IEP process to finding the right providers in your community, we're here to help you connect the dots and feel empowered every step of the way. Whether you're joining us live on Facebook or YouTube or listening later on your favorite podcast app, we're so glad you're here. So let's dive in and meet today's amazing guest. Today, we're joined by Lisa Richer, who is the founder of Journey to Bloom. Lisa is a neurodivergent success partner, workshop facilitator, author, and community leader who helps families and professionals move from feeling stuck to finding clarity, confidence, and courage. Through her work, she supports stronger relationships, better advocacy, and environments where neurodiverse individuals can truly thrive. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. And listening to the intro, I was writing down like, wow, there's so many connections to your language and my language. So I'm excited to be here.
We are so excited to have you. I love having people that are, I don't know how to put it, but like not your typical people that work with. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, everybody thinks psychologists, teachers, advocates, all of that, but you're a little bit out of the box. So tell us a little bit about Journey to Bloom.
Yeah. And thank you for saying that, because I am out of the box. I like to live out of the box too. I'm very nonlinear thinker. But interestingly, Journey to Bloom came to be because I was gifted not just one, but two neurodivergent boys. And so I've been on this journey for 20 years. So just a week after my first one was born, I was already diving into what do I do? Just different things weren't meshing as my other friends who had kids before me would. And so my journey into this world of neurodiversity started so long ago, really when I was born, because I was undiagnosed neurodivergent until my late 40s. And so I was doing this work and gifted these children, not even realizing that, wow, okay, now I understand the world, how the world didn't make sense to me and what makes it make sense now. And so I combine all those things into my consultancy with Journey to Bloom. Growing up as an elite level athlete, unknowingly neurodivergent, going through school, unknowingly neurodivergent, the majority of my life in corporate and professional, unknowingly neurodivergent. It was only 6 years ago that I was diagnosed, and in the midst of rebranding in my business at Journey to Bloom and expanding from not just working with parents, helping their children navigate the neurodiverse learning journey, but recognizing that I can also help individuals and organizations know better so that they can do better because I lived it. And even coaches that no one knew I was neurodivergent. I didn't even know. And so, there are these nuances that come together that I truly believe do make the business that I run unique. And I don't call myself a special education advocate because for anybody that's looking at this or not looking, I was met for years with this, an X, and oh, don't do that. And in fact, even just 2 months ago, I had a conversation where I got into a meeting with a parent and we were on with the school psychologist. And she's like, I thought this meeting was going to be without your advocate. And I paused and I said, but I don't come in as an advocate. I come in as a partner. And it changes and shifts the narrative in the system as well as with a parent. I work with people, not for them. They pay me, but I work with them, not for them.
Yeah. It's so funny that you say that because that's 100% my philosophy also. Yes, I'm an attorney, but everybody thinks attorney adversarial. But I was a teacher first. And I was the gen ed teacher and I was a special ed teacher. So whenever I go into the room, I never go in adversarially. I'm in to partner. We're focusing on the child, what's best for the child. And that's what we're going to be. And I'm going to play nice in the sandbox and everything's going to be beautiful until you tick me off. And then things will change if I have to. But like I always say, like, But this shouldn't be adversarial. If we're
Mhm.
all focused on the child, we can have a difference of opinion without being adversarial. You have a difference of opinion. Okay, let's look at the data. Does your opinion have data to support it? Does my opinion have data to support it? What is the data, or is there somewhere in between? It's focused on the child, and the needs of the child is so important.
And I love that you're saying that. I wrote that down, focus on the child, and it hits me in my heart. I'm an empath as well. And when I go into meetings, and this was from a principal who, when he retired, said, you need to do this for a living. You do things differently. And one of the things, the parting gifts he left me with was, you come into things, Lisa, as part of a team. You show up wrapping your arms around us in collaboration with a focus on the child. And so when I go into meetings, you basically took some of the words out of my mouth, Frances. And even with, like, you were talking about connecting dots, I talk about connecting dots and building bridges. And if we're not all there for the child, what are we there for? And the data and the diagnoses inform the decisions. They don't define the decisions. And so, sometimes I'll get people that go, how do you know so much? And what did you say you do again? Even though I met them maybe 40 years ago when I was calling myself an advocate, but changing who I say I am and how I engage and the knowledge that I have, it really does. Like, meeting people where they are and listening to your intro, I was very clear without you stating even what you had, that you do look at it as we're in partnership, just by how you introed the recording here.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's true. I'm a parent too. Was blessed with two neurodivergent children. Actually both later. I didn't, it wasn't like a birth neurodivergence. It was much later that they were diagnosed. It's interesting with my older one, because I always knew there was something, but I didn't know what, and it's so hard because, there's the boxes, right? IDEA gives us 13 categories, and you need to fit into one of these categories. But the reality is there is no box. When you look at diagnoses, ADHD, autism, anxiety, dyslexia, they all intertwine in so many ways. It's like, which is the primary? Does it really matter? Well, it does for the county and the paperwork stuff, but in reality, it doesn't. It's not supposed to. Does it? That's a whole nother story. But it's supposed to. That's how we get in. Now let's look at the whole child and what the child needs. Because just because a child is dyslexia, has dyslexia or dysgraphia, doesn't mean they don't need social emotional help also. And just, right?
100%. And you were talking about the boxes. So my kids, even though my oldest, we knew things were going on that first week, and his pediatrician said, trust your gut, which I had been told not to trust for many, many years. So it was almost like I was regifted the ability to trust myself when I became a mom. And it wasn't, my oldest was 4 when he actually was officially diagnosed autistic. At one point, we were said it was like a speech delay, but he had so many classic signs of being on the spectrum, but we didn't know at the time. So he was officially diagnosed at 4. My youngest wasn't officially diagnosed with any of his things until he was 8, when he had to go from developmental delay to a diagnosis. And this is where what was truly driving it, we did it as OHI, as a ADHD, and he had unspecified specific learning disabilities. But in 10th grade, just recently, we had him reassessed. He has all the Ds. So dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, but the dyslexia is not showing up because he had so much early intervention with a reading intervention and specialists, that he is so good with vocabulary now, because we taught him through prefix, suffixes, and root words and the CVC pieces, that he doesn't even test for it. But one of my really good friends is a reading specialist, and she's like, I know he has it. He's just no longer going to test for it because he has the tools. So that early intervention piece, I'm guessing you'll agree with the early intervention. When I talk about early intervention leads you to bloom, like initially when I started my business, it was all about that 2 to 5-year-old, because the earlier you can identify the needs, not the diagnosis per se. So the developmental delay code in the IEP, right? That was one of the,
Yeah.
up until I think it's second grade, the qualifying, we were still able to get with that, the speech, the OT, the PT, the socialization, all the things that were needed in order to help that child have the best chance of thriving. And it sounds like that's how you, I'm guessing, probably ran your classrooms as well,
Of
and at the
course.
core of the business that you do when you're working with clients.
Yes, 100%. It's funny because it always brings me back to when I was teaching kindergarten. I'm trying to remember, it was my first or second year, but I had twins. And one, I mean, he was so ADHD. It was bouncing off the walls and making me crazy. And finally, one day, I was like, you know what? Do me a favor. Can you go take down that bulletin board? And this is kindergarten. He's like, yeah. So he's up there taking down the bulletin board. I could stop at any point in the lesson and ask him a question and he knew the answer. Because, right? He just needed that something to be doing, but his brain was 100% like still can focus. And it's so like that's the reality. Like who needs to sit and learn like this? Like nobody does. Find how the children learn what they need and get there. I love those twins. I miss those twins. I mean, that was many, many, many. I mean, they're way into adulthood now, but like, but that's the reality is like, look at what our child needs, get out of our head of what it should be, which goes to what you were saying about trusting your gut. Mm-hmm. And I say that all the time to parents, like, trust your gut. It's so hard because especially as women, as mom, we're told not to, like, no, you're wrong. But our gut we need to trust our gut. Like if something doesn't seem right, like with my older one, like something didn't, like I knew there was something, but I didn't know what. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until I had a client come with autism with PDA profile and I was reading it and I went, oh my gosh, all the dots suddenly connected. And I knew that's where it was because she had some of the autism, but not like she does eye contact. She has deep relationships. She can have a conversation about anything with any age, a child to adult. And like, those are not autism, but it's like, I knew there was something. I just needed to figure out what and how, not that the what mattered other than to get the eligibility, but now I know how her brain works and how to interact with her better.
Absolutely. And that's so important. And what I love about what you're sharing, and I'm hoping that those that are listening take away from it is, and perhaps, and hopefully there's some teachers that are listening as well, or educators in any facet, administrators, having the ability to be given permission from schools to trust your intuition, to meet the child where they are and figure out how to help them with what they need. Because all the way back as early as pre-K, I would have teachers, I would have school psychologists, special educators that would come outside with me and say, I need you to go into a meeting and have this conversation. I don't feel like I can. I'm afraid I'm going to get in trouble. I was told not to, but I know that you need to. And then there's been some teachers who, thankfully, both of my kids ended up having in their first grade year, where one of them was told by administration, we can't have this child with a reading specialist because he already has an IEP. And so the IEP teacher, the special educator, needs to do this reading intervention. However, the reading interventionist was trained in these tools and resources that the IEP team, none of the special educators had any knowledge of. And so this teacher got creative and said, let's not go to administration yet. I'm just going to pull him into my back resource group when they came in the class to support the kids that didn't have an IEP. Let's show the data that it works. So there's creative ways to do it without feeling like you're going to get in trouble. In an ideal circumstance, the teacher wouldn't have felt the need to go around to do that. However, reality is, and doing this, essentially 20 years, but since 2016 as a business, doing this for 10 years as a business, it's not necessarily getting easier. Sometimes it's getting harder to go around. But if you as a parent trust some of the people you're working with, or those people that are working with you trust you, to give you that voice to do it. But as an educator, you're best suited to trust that intuition, that EQ, because I'm guessing 95% of the time, that's the reason teachers went into teaching to begin with.
Yep. And 98% of the time, they're leaving it because they're not able to do it.
Yeah.
I see that so often. I have a lot of teachers that are followers. I also have a lot of teachers that are clients, which is scary.
Me
but like,
too.
that's the thing. Yeah. but like the reality of it is that, and I say this all the time, the principals of schools, they define special education.
Yes.
You know, I can tell within 5 minutes at a meeting of how that administrator is, of how, whether they support special education, they don't support, if they're old school, if, you know, whatever it is. And it makes such the difference to know who the principal is. And I don't want to say what you can get away with, but what you can do and can't. There's been times I've had clients, or like they come to the strategy session, which is my consultation and strategy session, and I've talked to them and I'm like, look, here's where we are. These are your options. And there are times that I've said, honestly, this I think is your best option. Don't engage with me. Go to the principal, talk to the principal, and see what you can work out. Because I can tell from what you've said, this principal wants to make it work. And sometimes bringing in an attorney and an advocate, somebody else brings in the higher ups, and then the principal doesn't have the power to do it. It's the same thing I tell teachers. I'm not saying lie to your principal or stuff, but do what you think is right in your classroom. As long as the principal's not getting complaints, 9 times out of 10, the principal's not. What you're doing, and that's the end of it. But like, that's the reality, is like, look at what's the path of least resistance, right? What can you get done without bringing in? Now, there's definitely times like you need an advocate, you need an attorney, but there are times you can try without first.
Absolutely. And, and I have some parents that come to me really early on, just wanting to be proactive and having a partner. And so going in as a neurodiversity consultant or a neurodivergent success partner, depending on the audience that I'm working with, they do typically lean in and go, oh, tell me more. And they're willing to hear some of my creative ways. And I often say, I have a neurodivergent brain, and I think about things in ways that may shock you, but let's talk about them. I have experiences with people that we've tried things, and also don't be afraid to go talk to your central office team. And that's the flip side of this coin here is I have principals and special educators that want to do what's right by a child and go down the path of least resistance. But sometimes that's saying we're going to take them off a diploma-track, and they're in 3rd grade. It's not time yet to take them off. So you're going down this Appendix A, which talks about whether or not they stay on a diploma-track or go to a certificate. And we have to have this conversation where it says, like, proceed with extreme caution. And they're like, oh no, there's enough evidence to say yes. And I'm like, no. So instead of bringing in central office early on to get some clarity, because they weren't clear on it either, we spent 2 hours going down this path and then deciding, guess what? Now we need to have another meeting to go down this. But at the same time, had I not been in those conversations, they wouldn't have realized what they didn't know. The parents they had already said yes to something that they shouldn't have said yes to because they didn't understand it. And so when you bring in a partner, such as myself, and the way that you approach things too, whether you're an attorney, I'm not, but we're coming in as partners. And sometimes you do need to go to central office. I always tell clients, central office is my friend. I've worked with numerous people in central office. In fact, I have a principal who right now, she was a reading specialist before she became assistant principal and then a principal. But we're working with a twice exceptional child who really does need an IEP and specially designed instruction. But because the school psychologist pushed back and said no, the principal wasn't willing to go against that person or say, let's get somebody. But to your point, they're having a side conversation with the school, with the parents, saying, I want to put this person in this program. And I didn't think the meeting was going to go the way that it did. So instead of going back to their team and saying, how did we end up here? I really thought we were going to end up here. They just got silent and didn't try to challenge that other person who has maybe 3 or 4 years in the school system, But another school psychologist from 3 years earlier had gone to their central office team, and we created an IEP that was appropriate for that 2E student. And so now I have a meeting next week with the central office staff of that 2E group to say, here are the circumstances. Yes, against their peer set, they don't need specially designed instruction, but based on their cognitive abilities, there are 5 deviations from their greatest strength is 5 deviations from their greatest weakness. That to me tells me that there's a significant enough gap to need specially designed instruction for that child to truly access a free and appropriate public education. And I'm saying this obviously without saying names, but I'm saying this so that maybe there's an aha from somebody out there going, wow, I hadn't thought about it that way. And it's not judging those people that didn't go there. It's hopefully to get curiosity flowing of, maybe there is another way to do it, whether it's to go around the principal or to go directly to the principal outside of a meeting. There's 15 ways to slice the bread, and what works for one client isn't necessarily going to work for another, because it works with one principal isn't necessarily going to work with another. And so us, you and I, and knowing our clients, knowing the environment and understanding the system and meeting them where we need to. And then, like you said at the intro, connecting the dots that make sense for that unique journey. I feel like we're on similar paths to getting clients to thrive because we're meeting them where they are.
100%. And also knowing what our clients want.
Yes.
You know, I have some clients that are like, I don't care, my child's staying in the homeschool, period. Make it happen. I have other clients of like, I am done with this school. I want to go to a non-public. I don't want to see this school anymore ever again. And those are, once we can flesh that out,
yes,
then we can determine our plan. That's why I do what I call a strategy session, because it's not a consultation. I am talking to the parents. What do you want? What do you see? What's going on? And then talking through. So these are your options. If you push this, this is the way. If you push that, that's the way. You know, I see the data here for this. I don't necessarily see it for that, but we could set that up. And it's to truly strategize of what you want for your child, what your child's needs are, and how we can get there with the school.
Yeah. And that's where I would say I use my clarity, confidence, and courage journey map, because the clarity, so I can tell people who, what, and how to do it, but clients bring me their why. And so when you think about it, so for me, people come in and in the clarity stage, we're figuring out it's the internal. What are you struggling with? What do you know? What do you not know? And what don't you know you don't know? And how do we come to terms with where we are in the circumstances? And then the confidence piece is that building that relational piece. So now how do we put together like what you were saying, and how do we articulate it? How do I partner with you in those conversations or help craft things for you so that you can learn how to craft them for yourself and build those relationships with both inside the school system and those outside providers? And then the courage piece of it aligns with the systemic. What are we going to butt up against? What we just talked about, right, for the last 10 minutes. And how do I then help guide you to get your own courage to then be able to do it on your own? Nothing makes me happier than when, whether the parent wants the kids staying in the homeschool and they get through that process and they're able to say, I don't need you for the rest of this year because I've got this. Or if we get them into a non-public without having to have an attorney involved, sometimes we need to, but sometimes we can do it without. And so whichever case that is, they're there and they're a year or two into that and they reach out to me and I say, hey, did I miss the annual meeting? And they say, no, it was like a last minute. They had a gap. We did it. My child advocated for themselves. And guess what happened? And I get chills even just saying it out loud because I'm like, oh my gosh, that I did my job. I want people to work me out of a job. And then they're going to refer the next person to me. And that's when I know that they have what they need. And if they need in a transition to come back to me, they will.
I love that you say that, because that's the whole point of my YouTube channel and this show and everything else. I want to educate parents. I don't want them to need me. I'm here if you need me, but I want you to be able to do it on your own. I want to say it was like 5 years ago, I think. I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, I had a grandmother send me a message through Facebook and said, "Thank you so much. I watched your video. I went to the school, did exactly what you said, and they found my grandchild eligible."
Oh
And
my God.
exactly, right? Like
Oh,
this is why I do this. That's a thing. Like, did it bring me money? No. But does it bring my heart what it needs? 100%. And that's why I do what I do, because I love it and I want the kids to be able to thrive
mhm.
and get the right environment and parents to be able to do it on their own if necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. When I first had started the business, I had a tagline that said, "Every child deserves to live their best life." And the end of it is, and every parent deserves the resources and tools to get there. And that's
Yeah.
still part of what's on my site. I've shifted things a little bit, but that's always at the baseline of doing why the why behind doing what I do. Because I always say, like, the word why triggers me because I did grow up neurodivergent, and it's like, why are your kids doing that? Why did you do that? Why are you thinking that? Why? And so it triggers me. And so when I let go of that and said, people bring me their why, and then I help them navigate through it with my journey map and my Ripe Ideas roadmap as well. It's allows me to help them get to what those places. And oftentimes we may not realize how much we're impacting others, and then you get something like you just said from that grandparent.
Right. Exactly. And it's funny because I'm listening to your why questions and that. And the first thing that popped in my head is that somebody had said to me one time, "I don't know" is a perfectly acceptable answer. And that's okay. If you don't know your why, like you're struggling, your child's struggling, you don't know why, you don't know what's going on. That's why you're there available to help them get the clarity. That's why I'm here available to talk through what your options are, to go, see like what's going on, because we don't always know the why. We know our child's struggling. Why? I don't know. Let's investigate.
Absolutely. It's that unknown.
Yep.
And that's what my professional clients and so I've had clients over the years. I do like mindset transformation work. Many of them end up being neurodivergent, oftentimes unknowingly. Other times they're just a very linear thinker and they need to start to understand how to think nonlinear. And that's where my neurodivergent brain really helps them just poke at things that really trigger them, but make them realize, okay, if I want to get to the next stage, that's how I need to get there. But the unknown unknowns, that is, had several clients say to me, and parents as well, you have this innate ability to uncover the unknown unknowns and articulate it back to me in a way that I didn't even realize I said it. And the number one thing that helps me get people there is them knowing that vulnerability is strength and that it is okay to not be okay.
Yep. Because what are we teaching our children?
Right.
When we as adults say, "I need help, I can't do this alone," you're now telling your children it's okay to say you need help, you can't do it alone. I want to go back to something you said about the psychologist and about that meeting and why, the psychologist said and nobody would go against it. So there's an IEP team, person to interpret the results, general education, special education, parent, LEA, and then any related service providers. There's a specific reason why it's written like that, because each person has a different role. Your psychologist is to interpret the results. Your general education teacher is supposed to be able to talk about curriculum. Your special ed teacher is supposed to help with modifying the curriculum or modifying work or what accommodations, what sub-aids. The parent, you know your child best. And the LEA is kind of like the person that's running the meeting. And so it makes me so angry when I hear that, well, the psychologist said it, so that's, the way it is. And there have been many a time I've been at meetings. I had a psychologist one time. We had the disability code with autism, and the psychologist was trying to convince us to move it to DD. excuse me, developmental delay? Why? And she was doing her argument and then got all, well, with my 25 years experience, I think it's better to be TD. And I just looked at her and said, well, with my 30 years experience and master's in special ed, autism is a clearer picture. My client went, mm-hmm. And they ruled my way. And I hate saying my way, but like the reality is, let's look at the picture and what's more appropriate. Yes, the child was only 6 years old, but autism is autism. You don't need developmental delay.
Right. Absolutely. You know? And it's so frustrating to me what you just described. And I have other conversations I could have. One led us to having one of my clients get an attorney. I didn't realize that this one psychologist was the reason she hired me as an advocate in the first place. And then once I realized that the person had come in, they wanted to do ID as this child's, we were looking at multiple disabilities, but ID was what they wanted to do. However, this child ended up having this very unique profile with certain testing that we needed to get done in order to understand what was impacting the person's cognitive, because they had variability. It's a different child. But the variability in what they had, they kept wanting us to sign these papers. And I kept telling the client and I were like, no, we're not signing them. But the school psychologists had dug their heels in so much and gotten so combative with us that the parent called me and said, what do you think? And I told him, we need to hire a lawyer. And what happened, which was really interesting, is the lawyer was like, this is my lane, Lisa, and this is your lane. And here's how we're going to work in unison. And it was my first, and I'd met this lawyer before at a COPA conference. And I'd worked with other lawyers in part with, like, I've been through rights law training. And so I've worked with other lawyers. My practicum advisor is a lawyer as well, happens to be in Maryland. And I snatched her up years ago. I was like, you're going to be my advisor. But so I understood the intersectionality of working together. But he was really the first one to help me understand that there are sometimes lines, and you're in a unique perspective, Francis, because you were a teacher and a special educator and then turned lawyer. But there are a lot of special education lawyers that have not worked in the school system. And so this is one, and I work with others that were like that. And so we really partner together to say, okay, or maybe it's a county that they're not as familiar with, and I have more experience in the county or the township. And so, but what happened was the lawyer was able to tap into some of the law pieces that I had talked to, but he was able to double down on. And then all of a sudden, the school psychologist couldn't do anything more. And ironically, oh, this is so ironic, the assistant principal at the school that I'm talking about there, I didn't even connect this till just now, is the principal at the school of this other child who wouldn't go against the school psychologist. And she was in that meeting. Now that I think about that, isn't that ironic? So again, back to now, how important administration is. I hadn't even connected that, but the administration is so important in the conversation. And now that I look back on it in retrospect, I should have, and I could have reached out to central office earlier and said, we need someone in the central office team that's special education that understands 2E students, twice exceptional. The child's autistic, the child also has dysgraphia. We need someone that can understand that profile because the team in place doesn't understand it. And that's my lesson to be learned. And I share that vulnerability here because had I done it, we may have had a different outcome in the very last meeting. Now we're going to have 2 or 3 more meetings to maybe get the outcome that we wanted in the first place because I didn't pull the full team in. So never think that it's not a good idea to find those experts, even if they're in the school system.
Right. But, and it's, there's a lot of times that it takes 2 to 3 meetings to get what we want.
True. That is very true.
Right. We have to set it up. We have to get where it is. We have the end goal. And it's frustrating. I have a senior attorney working with me. She's new to special ed law, but has been an attorney for a lot of years. And she's like, I just feel so frustrated because I feel like we got nothing done. I'm like, wait a minute. Let's look at what you did get done. Is the school doing the evaluations? Yes. That's the first step. Evaluations haven't been done in over 2 years. If our end goal is non-public placement, we have to have those evaluations done, because a non-public placement won't even look at you if you
Yes.
haven't had evaluations in 2 years. So we got to do the steps to get to where we are. And sometimes, frustrating as it is, we have to have 3-4 meetings. But we've got that end goal and we're working towards it. And eventually we'll get there. Right.
Good point. Well said. And absolutely. And you're right. And we will get there. And we did, in this case, we got a 504 in place of at least some of the other things, because the person was on an IEP with speech and language impairment. And that, for the last 2 years, we were saying that's not the right qualifying diagnosis. We really needed to be, at that point, autism, but now there's other things going on. And so, it's finding that happy medium, but also having the team that you're working with and having the families trust you. So this family I've been working with for a while, and they understood it. The person's a former teacher as well, but they also understood we're not going to get anywhere with this team the way that they're digging their heels in, but we can at least get something. And it's a collaborative effort. And they know that I'm working toward one thing and they're working towards. So I think that's a really great reminder to anybody listening is 1% better and baby steps, as long as they're stepping and putting you in the right direction and leading to, I always say, like, we want to look at the end in mind, but we need to keep going in the middle steps to get there. And don't be attached to that outcome, because it creates unnecessary frustration when you're attached to the outcome and you're not looking at those micro shifts that are helping you get there.
Right. And sometimes that outcome changes.
True.
Because once, I say it often, once we look at the data and get the data, we have the evaluations, we have the data we need, we have the behavior charts, whatever the school's collecting. Now we need to look at what's best. I tell clients all the time, like, I understand this is what you want, but if I don't have the data to support that argument,
right,
I'm not the right match. I am not going to fight for something that I don't have the support to fight for. Now, that being said, usually the data, depending on how you look at it, you can argue one of two ways sometimes, to stay in or to not. And I can work with that. But if it's dead set, like, there's no way your child needs this and you want that, I can't, because to me, that's not what's right for your child. Now, that being said, you're the parent. What's right for your child is 100%. But I have to keep my integrity for who I am. And so that's what's so important, to make sure that we have the data and can have those conversations of, this is where we are. ALO, I want to go back to alternative learning outcomes real quick, because the way Maryland does them now, it takes an hour to go through these stupid things. And
they don't have enough.
No.
The documents that go along with it, I actually printed them out, Francis, and even going along with it. And then the school team went back and was looking at them. And I was like, I have the bulletin right in front of me, because I printed it before we knew we were going to have this meeting. And I was like, we're in a general education classroom right now with special supports. We're not even in the right LRE to even consider going there. But their understanding was that they were told in third grade, you have to start having the conversation. Every year, starting in third grade, but you don't necessarily have to go through the documentation if you agree. Otherwise, and it's so gray. So I'll pause there, because you may know more than I do, but it's so gray. And they were going to go back to corporate, and I was not corporate, central office. I was like, we probably should have pulled a central office person in, and they're like, yeah, we're sitting here thinking the same thing, but they at least admitted it, right? But again, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, no, it's right. It's because it's so gray, you can go either way. Like, I now know it well enough that if my clients want their child to stay on diploma-track or to ALO, I know how to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, when we have the alternative learning outcomes, or ALO, go through the whole thing. The school says the child's eligible. You as the parent can 100% say, nope. I don't consent. I don't consent to alternative learning outcome curriculum. I don't consent to alternative learning outcome assessments. No. What happens then? the school must look for core curriculum, general education curriculum classes. They cannot put your child in an alternative learning outcome class, period. Even if you have a 10th grade child reading on a kindergarten level and they think that's the best thing, no, they have to be in the general education curriculum. And that's the part that a lot of parents don't understand. Well, a lot of schools don't understand either. And it's that challenge. But that's the thing. It's like, I see it with kids below third grade on the alternative learning outcome. And I see the school telling the parents, oh, we're not determining high school. We're not determining high school. We're just doing this now. But if you take a first grade child that's on a pre-K level and take them off general education curriculum and put them on alternative, how are they ever going to get up there and reach, right? That being said, I have had clients that said, you know what, for school, we want to put them in the ALO right now because we see how they're struggling. We think that's best. But at home, we're going to work on the academic stuff so that now he's doing well in school, learning how to school, but we're doing the academic. And there's a chance 2 years down the road that we'll switch him off, because that's the other thing. You can switch.
Absolutely. And it was only, I want to say, about 3 years ago that they mandated the parents' input, because prior to that, there were people that were just getting placed on it. And so there was law that was changed and so I'm aware of that. My client that I was just talking about, we had these conversations, she still she's still not fully clear. English is not her first language. And so she's still not really clear, but the team, and they were doing it for the right intentions, but the wrong reasons. They feel like the child is struggling greatly. However, the child does have enough variability and is great in certain aspects, and we need to give that person a chance to show. And they're far enough behind, Francis, to your very intuitive point. If we pull them out now, bringing them back in a year, they're going to be that much further behind. They're already more than 2 grade levels behind. This conversation should be happening, but it should be happening in the way of, we keep them on diploma track. Now, what is the appropriate environment to put them in? And it was interesting, though, because I actually had gotten this team, because most of the things were written in proceed with extreme caution. There's 3 different sections. Yep. And only like 2 things were like, go ahead. And I said, when you look at the variability, and there was even one that was like, no, but the majority of them were sitting in that extreme caution. I was like, until there's more in the non-extreme caution, we don't have the data, even from this perspective, to support even saying yes to the alternative. We talked about it for about 15 minutes. We went through the bulletin, we went through all the data, and they ended up saying yes. But what was interesting is there was a part in the document that already said that he had qualified for it. And they had told me that it was automatically placed there. And I said, I know your system. It doesn't automatically get placed there. And I won't say the name of the school because I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but I know that they must have put that in. So they had already predetermined, which families, that is not okay. You are an integral part of the IEP team. And when those determinations are made without you, that is not acceptable. And so that goes back to the same thing with the school psychologist, because this particular psychologist and the one other I was saying both said, I think, not what does the school team think, or what does the IEP team think. It was, this is what I think. And those are also red flags. When you start to see it being said, what do I think versus what do you think as the team, that's also a red flag that the person saying it that way feels like they have all the power to make a decision over the inclusive team, which is not appropriate. So that might be a time to either go, let me talk with somebody in central office, or let me reach out to someone like Lisa or someone like Frances to have that strategy session or that consult to see what is my gut telling me, and do I need to bring somebody else in to ensure my child is getting what they need.
Right. But that's why I love that Maryland allows the parents to override it.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter. So there are times I'll tell the clients, I'm like, you guys aren't going to agree to it? Okay, great. Let the school do what they want. The parents will still participate. I sit back and don't do anything. If I know my client wants a certain thing, and I
Yeah.
think like if they want the ALO, then I have to participate more
Right.
to make sure that it goes that way. Because you can't, if your child doesn't qualify for ALO, you can't as a parent put your child on ALO.
Right. Yes.
So,
That's a good. Yeah.
but it's such a, it's such a frustrating form. An hour it takes us to do it. And it's so annoying. But it's what the state has told us we have to do. And knowing how to do it and what to do is so important, because it does matter sometimes.
Yes.
And looking at it, figuring it out, asking the school for it in advance, getting a copy of it, looking at it in advance so that you go into, because I'll tell you right now, the school's gone through everything and know what they're checking. They might pretend they're not, but they know. And you as a parent need to do that as well.
And it's interesting because this school team actually wasn't sure. They haven't done many of them, and they weren't. But in some ways it actually helped, because by the end they were like, yeah, I guess we can agree to it based on our conversation here. And so they were open to the conversation. But yes, I mean, a lot of times they do. What was interesting is I had the third grader, and then I also had a student who is a rising 10th grader. And we as a team, parents and I and the school team, all decided, okay, for this particular child, we think it is time to consider it because of all the struggles and the doors that actually opened for this high schooler to get more supports as they go through high school and off to college classes, because you can stay college classes even if you're on the certificate track. That's for a whole nother, we could have a whole nother conversation, around that. But they were very different. One's elementary and one's high school. And even the high school one, it was 2 years of conversation where we were talking about whether or not it was appropriate for the student yet. And when the anxiety became a driving factor of the child's not happy now, then it was like, okay, the pressure isn't worth the health. And so now we want to have a conversation. But I do agree. I love that it is now in part a parent's decision, where it wasn't for years. It really does give parents the authority to be a really integral part of the team at such a critical stage.
Yeah, 100%. And there's one thing I do want to point out also, because there is a misnomer out there about alternative learning outcomes. Alternative learning outcomes does not mean that you are no longer in general education.
Correct. Yes.
You can be on alternative learning outcomes and still be in a general education class doing a modified curriculum. And that's something that people are like, but they can't do kindergarten level. You're 100% right. They can't do kindergarten level. But if the kids are all learning, they're right, or let's go higher, second grade, if they're doing spelling, okay, yes, your kid can't do spelling, but they are getting a benefit of just looking at the words. Or maybe theirs is, here's, the rest of the class is doing a spelling test. Here's yours. We're going to give you the C and the A and the T. Can you spell cat? And putting the letters. However it is, it can be modified. But that's the thing I hate. They're like, but I don't want him in special education classes. Well, he doesn't have to be. He can be in gen ed on alternative learning outcomes if he's happy and doing okay there.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because I have a friend whose child is in the ALS program, has been in alternative learning outcomes, but they're in Howard County. And in Howard County, we're an inclusion county. And so there are push in regardless for general education to get what you're talking about. But I also work with clients in like Anne Arundel and Prince George's and Baltimore City County and Montgomery. And there's some programs that they're all outside and the parents have to push to get them in. And it's really interesting because some parents love the way that Howard County does it, some love how others, and some want a mixture. So what you're describing, I think, is so important for parents to understand. And this is where confusion happens too, because there are so many options. And each county also, sometimes I feel like living in Maryland, every county I go into, I'm moving into a new state.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's just different. And even in Howard County, we use a different system than they use in Montgomery and otherwise. So even just looking at IEPs becomes a different animal sometimes because of how there's the same parts, but the way that it's put in place. Yeah. And so I say this to tell people, you don't necessarily need to hire me or Frances, although a lot of our content and information, and even if it is a strategy session or a consult, we can guide you in some of those directions. Sometimes you don't need us to be part of the team. Maybe you don't need us now, maybe not yet, not ever, but we're there to help inform how you make those decisions going forward as well.
Yeah. And I get questions all the time like, well, which county is the best county for special education? Can't say that. What's the profile, right? Because it used to be Montgomery County is, but you know what? If you want all inclusion, Montgomery County might not be the best place, and that's the thing. It's like, you need to figure out what you want for your child, then go research it to determine if you have that open.
And I tell people now, it's not even a county. It's who's in those schools and what they're doing. Because a month ago, I would have said this one Title I school in Howard County was phenomenal because the principal, and that principal just got moved to another school.
Yep.
And the way they drive their team and the inclusion, I'm hoping they bring it to this other school. And I'm hoping that the principal that takes over does it too. But I don't know. So I always tell people, don't move for a school, because where I live, there's 2 schools right behind me. And by middle school, my kids weren't even in public anymore. Well, my oldest one was, but he was virtual. And then by high school, he wasn't. So, don't move into a house because there's a school. Move to where you want to be and then figure it out from there.
Right. Exactly. 100% true. And I just noticed the time, and I could talk to you all day. You need to come back on the show because I'm sure we could go off on so many topics. I'm so glad we met, and thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your words of wisdom.
It was so fun and just so engaging. I felt like I was talking to a friend that I'd never met before, but I've known forever. So thank you for having me, Frances.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Stress Free IEP. We hope today's conversation gave you new tools, insights, or just a little more peace of mind as you support your neurodivergent child. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone in your village. You can always learn more and connect with me at schefterlaw.com or follow along on social media. Until next time, remember,